Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Fort Lee Public Library. Tonight, I would like to introduce you to a gentleman. But before I do, I would also like to read the definition of a gentleman. Any man spoken of in a polite way. A polite, kind, generous, courteous, compassionate, and of course, a gentleman. Enough said, Dr. John Muciaccia.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, hello.
A little while ago, I had a folder up here. Did somebody take it? It was right up here. I think it was blue color.
I can't hear this.
It was right here. As Olga's looking for my blue folder, let me begin by saying that I'd like to thank Norma Seibel. It was Norma Seibel who was unable to get into our Hoboken book talk in July. She had the courage and the intelligence to call the Fort Lee Library and ask if they would have a book talk with me. That's why we're here. Norma, could we give Norma a round of applause, please? Olga, do we still have that folder?
No, we don't know where it went.
We have to find that folder. That folder is the evening. I also, while we're looking for this folder, which I think is a green folder, that helps. I want to thank a few people besides Norma. I'd like to thank the three people who made this book a reality. Because any author or movie maker who thinks he or she did the whole piece by themselves is wrong. This book, Spirit Lives, came about as the result of three people. Roger Ancinelli, who gave me the idea a few years ago, while I was finishing my first book, he said to me, "A second book is coming through." I said, "That's impossible. I have to finish my first book." He said, "I'm being told you could finish your first book and do your second book." He was right. The second person I'd like to thank is, well, immediately I want to thank Carmela for finding my folder. Thank you, Carmela. I don't know how it got in the back. Let's give Carmela. The second person I'd like to thank is my editor for my first book and this book, Rafael Cordova. Rafael has been exemplary in the work he's done, and I want to recognize him. Rafael? I think Roger was out of the room when I mentioned his name. The gentleman in the back, all dolled up, is Roger Ancinelli. And the third person who is responsible for putting this book together is Mark Scardino. That is Mark Scardino. And Steve Dunlop, come on in. We have plenty of seats. We'll make room. Come on in. We have room to sit next to each other. Yes, we can. You're welcome.
Ever so thoughtful always.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. I first want to talk a little about how this book came about. This book came about through a lifelong interest I've had in this topic. When I was a little boy, I was about 8 years old. I was an adorable 8-year-old boy. I was the type of 8-year-old that every mother wanted as her own son. I could remember my parents were thinking of buying a house in Hoboken, and my mother called her father in. He would be, of course, my maternal grandfather. He was a Sicilian immigrant, Giuseppe Galeotto. And as soon as he walked in the front vestibule of the house, he turned to my mother in Italian and said, "This is a good house." Based on that, and that alone, my mother and father bought the house, and it's proven to be a wonderful house. I then found out that my grandfather, Giuseppe Galeotto, knew things, and people would go to him if they needed advice on family relationships, on business, romance, and he would always give good, wise advice that was accurate. So as a little, did I mention an adorable 8-year-old boy? I was fascinated with people who knew things. A few years later, I'm 17, and I read in the local newspaper that there's a woman in Edgewater who would find missing bodies, usually the bodies of children. Her name was Florence Sternfels. Maybe some of you remember that name. She lived on Route 5. So I borrowed the family car, and I drove to this exotic town called Edgewater. For me, a boy from Hoboken, Edgewater was exotic, and it looked nothing the way it looks now. Edgewater was kind of a backwater town in those days. I drove to her house. I knocked on her door. I had no appointment. She let me in. And I said, "I read about you. I'm fascinated by what you do." So she allowed me in her house for, maybe 20, 30 minutes. I wanted to get a reading out of it. I didn't. She said, "If you come back in 3 days on Sunday night, I give readings to everybody who comes, free." So I went back 3 days later with my best friend, who was a fellow by the name of Joe Zana. As Joe and I are driving from Hoboken to Edgewater, he said to me, "John," he said, "I'm only going because of you. I don't believe in this. This is nonsense." Well, we get to Florence Sternfeld's house on Route 5 in Edgewater. Now the living room that I was in, just myself and Florence a couple days earlier, is filled. Its capacity. We had difficulty, Joe and I, finding a seat. Florence went around the room to each and every one of us and gave us readings. When she got to Joe Santa, she said, "You're a skeptic. You don't believe in what I do you?" He turned to me as though I had secretly given her that message. I mean, this is pre-cell phone days, so I couldn't have communicated with her. And I said, "Joe, she's psychic. She knows these things." A couple of years ago, I go to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, in the dead of winter. I wanted to finish my first book, Thinking in English, and I wanted to get away from computers and cell phones. So I check into my room in the famous Strand Hotel where they filmed Shane. Remember that movie?
Yes.
At least I got 2 or 3 nods on this side. Nothing from this side at all. I check into my room, I go to the wall to put on the light switch, and the lights don't work. So my suitcase was still packed. I had just arrived 2 or 3 minutes earlier. I called downstairs. I said, "This is John Muciaccia. I just checked in." "Oh, we remember you. The electricity doesn't work in my room." "Don't worry, we'll send a maintenance man." Within a couple of minutes, the maintenance man was there. He knocks on my door. I let him in. His name was Aka. Filipino man. He said, "Sir, what's the problem?" I said, "There's no electricity." He smiles. Why is he smiling? He said, "There's no problem with the electricity." He went over to the wall, he flipped the switch. Now, I know I'm capable of turning on electric lights. I said, "Aka, I give you my word. A couple minutes ago, that light switch didn't work." He smiles broader. He says to me, they send me to help people with creative projects." I said, "Who's they?" He said, Spirit, are you working on a creative project? I said, yes, but how do you know? He said, they know everything. I'm here to give you some suggestions and to tell you before you leave Jackson Hole, you must go to Hidden Falls. It's a place in Teton where the spirits gather every night. One more example of how my interest as a young man, a boy and a young man, was piqued. I think it was 2005, 2006, I wanted to go to Ellis Island to see the marker that I had purchased for my father's immigration. You know, they have the Germany wall, the Irish wall, the Italian wall, and whatnot. But I also wanted to trace my dad's immigration. I get there, I punch in Dad's name on the computer, and up comes the computer version of the handwritten manifest of the ship. Because Dad came over on a ship. Back in those days, you didn't fly into the United States because airplanes, jetliners weren't invented. And I always remember my dad telling me about Ellis Island, what it was like. I see the date. The date is September 19th, 1907. Now that may mean nothing to you, but let me tell you this part of the story that I've held in abeyance. When I called up Ellis Island, you have to buy a ticket to go on the ferry from Jersey City to Ellis Island. I called up in August, and my idea was to go Labor Day weekend, which that year, Labor Day was September 3rd. When I called up, I had my American Express card, this very, very card. And the gentleman on the other side of the phone said, I'm sorry, sir, your card is not going through. Did you pay your last bill? I said, I paid all my bills. Hung up the phone, called up American Express. They said, your card is fine, there's nothing wrong. 3 or 4 hours went by, and something made me change my mind. From September 2nd, I thought it'd be too crowded, Labor Day weekend. Something made me say September 19th. Same card, same telephone rep. He smiled. I could hear his smile in his voice. He said, your card's fine. I just sent you a ferry ticket for September 19th. So now you see, when I get to Ellis Island, I'm amazed that I'm there on the anniversary of my dad's immigration. How do you do that? How do you do that? How do those things happen? These are all examples of how Spirit works in and through us. I can remember being at Whole Foods a couple of years ago, sitting with Sue and her husband. Sue, raise your hand so everybody sees you. And we were talking about the completion of this book. A couple tables away is a lady who happened to overhear our conversation and asked if I would recommend a meeting to her. But the interesting thing about that story is that woman had been sitting several tables away, out of earshot, was asked by one of the employees at Whole Foods to move because they had to dress the window. That move put this woman right next to where I was. How does that happen? Now, it's kind of funny because when I was planning for this talk, Olga, the lady who just spoke a moment ago, said, well, our last author, we got 5 or 6 people in the audience. I knew that wasn't going to happen tonight. Because you notice in the title, I have an exclamation point. Spirit lives. That's why tonight we're going to have some music, we're going to have some entertainment, we're going to have some crystal bowl healing. It's a program. And it's a program to give you education, to give you hope, to give you knowledge. So when you leave here, you'll realize we are much more than what we think we are. We're very deep entities, each and every one of us. I'm going to call Nick Calabrese back. He's going to introduce our first entertainer. Nick, would you come on back up? Thank you.